Hello, everyone, and welcome to Zero Day Dispatch's monthly dialogue series. I'm Priya, the founder of Zero Day Dispatch, and I'm joined by Rohana, our cyber policy research associate, and Irene Courtney, our community outreach coordinator. This strategic dialogue aims to unpack Kenya's WorldCoin case and use it as a lens to explore the broader implications of data exploitation, consent, digital surveillance, and the uneven application of digital rights globally. So, what is WorldCoin and what is the case? WorldCoin is a for profit cryptocurrency project that uses iris biometrics. The company was founded in 2019 by OpenAI chief executive Sam Altman. WorldCoin's business is to provide a reliable way to authenticate humans online, which it calls World ID. The case. The recent ruling by the High Court of Kenya against WorldCoin marks a critical inflection point in global debates on data protection and digital rights. The judgment found that WorldCoin collected sensible biometric data from Kenyan citizens without valid consent and in violation of several provisions of the country's Data Protection Act of 2019. This case is not only exposing legal and procedural gaps, but also has raised pressing questions about digital exploitation, power asymmetrics, and the ethics of data collection in the global south. This case is emblematic of broader structural issues, how emerging technologies are being deployed in low and middle income countries without adequate safeguards, oversight, or community engagement. It also brings into sharp focus the tensions between innovation and constitutional rights, particularly the right to privacy. Before we introduce our speakers, Rohana will outline some housekeeping rules for this session. Hi, Rohana.
Welcome, everyone, and hi, Priya. Before we dive in, let me quickly run through some Zoom tips to help us have a great session together. This will be a 1 hour discussion. There will be 10 to 12 minutes allotted for our guest speakers. Sorry. The last 15 minutes are allocated to the audience for their questions. Please be aware that this session is being recorded. By participating, you consent to being recorded. All attendees will be muted throughout the presentation. Only the speaker and the host will have their video on. Attendees can keep their video off or on. Please use the chat box to submit questions. We'll address them during the Q&A session at the end. We recommend using speaker view for the best experience. This recording will be submitted to various social media outlets. It will be free of charge and for educational purposes only.
Thank you, Rohana. I am now delighted to introduce our first speaker, Carolina Braga, a privacy program manager at Meta. With a Master of Law in Responsible AI and an MBA in Information Security Management, Carolina brings both legal depth and technical insight to this very urgent conversation. Welcome, Carolina.
Thank you, Priya. Glad to be here. So let me start by sharing some presentation that I put together for me to talk about. And so I know that you started telling us about WorldCoin, but I just wanted to summarize that the WorldCoin, as you mentioned, was based on the High Court decision of Kenya that ruled against WorldCoin entities, prohibit them from collecting, processing, or transferring biometric data in Kenya without valid consent and a data protection impact assessment in place. So why this decision was so important and why it's valuable for us to discuss here. I brought three main points. I think that there's a general understanding that countries in the global south are not heavily regulated and so more easily accessed by external companies, especially in the West or in the North, global North. And this decision shows that this is not necessarily the case, especially when it comes to privacy regulations. And so we have the understanding that Africa countries and Latin America countries are not strictly regulated, but I think me and Joy can tell you that there is a lot of regulations related to privacy and data protection, not only as a general regulation, so LGBT in Brazil, but also is spread across our several regulations like criminal law, civil law, consumer regulations, and of course frameworks that comes from the authorities, not only the Data Protection Authority, but also financial authorities, and consumer protection authorities, and so on and so forth. And so that brings to spotlight that those regulations exist and those countries are in fact protected. It also casts a spotlight in the trend of tech companies to ignore those regulations in the global south or exploit their absence or some gaps that might exist in those regulations, as it was the case here with Kenya. And brings to the point that, and the discussion that I want to highlight here in my presentation, that innovation should never come at the cost of human rights, and the fact that it doesn't really need to have that. It's not a dichotomy, and that's what I will try to explain in the next few slides. It doesn't have to be a zero sum, but it can and it should be a positive sum. So there is in the global south some innovation challenge where the countries in the global south, they need and they want to attract those companies to enable development of their technologies on the infrastructures, but there is at the same point they want to protect the personal information of the other people in the country, especially sensitive data. So the authorities are in that dichotomy of how much should I regulate and how much should I prohibit or limit those companies from exploiting the data of the person without being a burden or without delaying the innovation in those countries that so much need those innovations to happen. So, for example, in Brazil, we have the case of Meta that came that the first step, the Brazilian authority decided not to allow Meta to use the personal data of the Brazilian users to train the AI, and so that decision could be considered harsh by some, and but the good point is that it led Meta to work on providing clarifications on how the data would be trained. It provided the protection impact assessment, risk assessment. The legal teams worked a lot closely with the Brazilian authority, and ended up reversing that decision to allow Meta to train their AI with data protection. So just by changing that decision does not mean that the Brazil authority is allowing Meta to do everything, and so for the other technical companies, but it means that there is a need or a try to make the middle ground of allowing innovation in a safe environment, considering and respecting Brazilian regulations for data protection. And so what I want to bring is exactly a shift from the way we think about innovation. As I mentioned at the beginning, innovation should not be a zero sum. We talk about a lot of that in the privacy by design principles, and I want to bring that in a more broader scope for innovation as well. It should not be a case of either or. So privacy protection and data protection or innovation. It could and it should be a positive sum where we can have innovation in a safe way while protecting the data of our individuals. And the path for that, in my personal opinion, is to have innovation in order that serves humanity and a human-centric design approach when we are building and talk about innovation. What that means is that the innovation, and of course in this case I'm talking especially about AI, but this is also true for general innovation, should be focused on understanding the human needs and desires to create meaningful solutions. This ensures that innovation is not only different or new, but also relevant and impactful. So innovation, we should not innovate just for innovation purpose. We should innovate in order to serve something to serve human rights and serve humanity in a more general aspect. So the key aspect when talking about a human-centric design is we have to build with empathy, so understand human perspective, and that's very related to keep human in the loop when we are talking about AI. This is also predicted in the AI Act, for example. Collaboration, so get human involved in the design process. Again, human in the loop, but also having communities have humanity in the general sense participate in the discussions and debate of developed AI. not only doesn't necessarily indirectly in the process of the building an AI system, but in the debates more general on how we should develop AI. Also provide iteration, so continuous testing and refining the solutions based on feedback. So have the humans that are using that solution also have a voice in what should be improved, if that's working or what's not working, and how we can continuously improve those AI systems more generally. Usability, so ensuring that the solution is easy to use and understand. This is also directly related to the transparency principle that we have in the AI Act, to make sure that the individuals that are using that understand what's the purpose, that first that we are using, they are actually interacting with an AI agent, and how to use that AI agent, what was the purpose of the creation, and how they should use that. Needs and requirements, so identify what are the human priorities, needs, and requirements to be able to create that based on those needs and requirements. Again, back to the human-centric approach of as the main focus of what we want to build in order to accept and achieve those needs and requirements, and not just for a general purpose that does not solve any kind of human necessity, for example. So yeah, that's what I wanted to bring to the debate, and I'll pass to Joy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carolina. Uh, Let me just introduce Joy first. So, our next speaker is Joy Eziashi, a seasoned online safety researcher and advocate, renowned for creating initiatives that protect vulnerable communities online. As the leader of the Africa Online Safety Platform Project, she drives partnership development, fundraising, research, education, and content creation, making the internet safer for all. Thank you so much for being here, Joy. You have the floor to yourself.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'll quickly share my screen. Okay, great. So I have been introduced, so I don't need to introduce myself again. But I work with an organization called Impact Amplifier, and we manage the African Online Safety Platform. And on this platform, you see where we have the Getting Help section, where you can find the data protection laws for different African countries, just in case you need to have access to that. Trying to move my screen. Okay, great. Okay, talking about the situation of what happened in Kenya around the WorldCoin issue. Already we've spoken about the massive biometric data collection that was done and the suspension by the Kenyan Data Protection Office and the court ruling of the violation of Data Protection Acts. I wanted to talk about the structural power imbalance when it comes to the low and medium income countries. Most of the time, the big tech comes to the low income communities to test products and do tech pilots of products they've built. I think what happened in Kenya shows like a pattern of unregulated tech pilots that has been happening in low and medium income countries because of weaker safeguards. Of course, as Carolina said, there are laws in these countries, but the enforcement of the laws has been the issue. And consent, when you're talking about consent around data that is being collected, and when that consent comes under economic duress, is not consent. So privacy isn't just legal, it's cultural and economic. When you have to incentivize people with money in terms of because of the context of the country, in terms of poverty, to be able to collect their data, you haven't truly given informed consent. So I want to say that trust is not transactional. when you're building a product, especially for big tech, there has to be informed and free ethical data practices put in place. So people have to be truly informed about what their data is going to be used for. And when you're collecting data, it doesn't have to be long life biometric markers, because as for the case of WorldCoin, we know that this data is not like your email addresses. It's an iris. You can never change your iris. This is your eye, and you can never change it. So we have to be sure that data that is collected is not long life biometric markers. It has to be clear for the purpose and the limits when it comes to what is going to be used for, especially when we are talking about surveillance and control. We know that most the big techs have a lot of data they have collected, and having that massive amount of data in the hand of one person could be very risky and has trust and safety implications. Also, about data exploitation, I wanted to say that who profits from this data? When you talk about the WorldCoin case, extracting data from the global south without clear benefits of how the local communities are profiting is not is exploitation, actually. So as Caroline said, innovation should not be an excuse for exploitation or human rights exploitation. So we have to be careful in terms of what data is being collected, how is this data used, and who is profiting from this data. So the Kenyan rule is a clear indication that the global south can actually push back in terms of how data is used, how data is stored, and how data is collected from the African countries, especially the low and medium income countries. So first of all, it also gives a global attention to the local regulations. Most times, big techs come to and overlook the global and the local regulations in some of these low and medium income African countries. So the Kenyan rule is actually giving, or is not just about Kenya, it's about the setting around low and medium income countries and how data is being collected in these countries. So is a pushback, actually. In terms of the principles of ethical deployment, as I said, data has to be, there has to be information, clear information of what the data is used for. It has to be free, informed, and culturally contextual in consent. So people have to be informed exactly where their data is going to, what it is used for. And data minimization is really important. And when data is collected, it has to be locally stored. One of the issues was how the data was transferred internationally without consent and proper frameworks. Also, the community co-design of the tech initiative. I think most of the time, tech products are developed and then brought to test with us, and not developed for us. And basically, they're developed for us, not developed with us, actually. So most of the time, we have to be conscious of how these tech products are co-designed. It has to be co-designed with the community. There has to be regulatory capacity building for the communities that is going to be tested with. So actually, what I wanted to talk about is also inclusion, and we have to rethink inclusion. Who's included in this? We have to invest in local tech governance capacity. As I said, technology should be done with us, not to us. We have to be involved in all aspects of the technology, not just when it's being tested. And communities in the global south are not test labs. So big tech and platforms have to ensure that they localize their compliance in terms of how they have to respect international local laws, right? And the standards around data protection, not just for the global north, but also the global south. All right, thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Joy.
you. Um, Thank you so much for all of your presentations. I guess now we're heading towards the second part, which is basically our favorite part, as Priya has also mentioned. It's more like the questions from panelists to panelists. So I leave the floor open if Joy has any questions for Carolina, or if Carolina has any questions for Joy.
I do have a question for Joy, if I may start first.
For sure.
Love the presentation. Thanks a lot for that, for bringing that African vision. As someone that come from Brazil, unfortunately, I don't have that visibility enough. So I think we totally should have more of the global South voice, but more importantly, voice from Africa in all those debates. So I think my question for you is, how do you think how global South, and more specifically Africa, could be more proactive and more participative in the debate, on those ethical debates, when we are creating frameworks on how to govern AI, for example?
I think basically it has to be, we have to come together as an organization, involve every stakeholder. Most of the time when governance around AI is developed, big techs are brought together, international organizations are brought together, but local voices are not brought into the picture or on the table when these discussions are done. So creating a community of practice where every voice is being heard, whether it's local civil society organizations, whether it's local universities, whether it's local tech organizations coming together to voice and give a voice. Because when creating these policies, when policies are created and it's not created with everyone involved, there is an implication when risk, because when you're talking about AI and risk involved in AI, sometimes the local context is not brought into place in terms of what are these risks going to, how is it happening in Africa? How is it happening in the global south? So it's basically as if the laws and the ethical governance laws are created for the global north only. So I think involving everyone, developing community of practices where every voice is heard would be a way to go. Okay, I have a question for you around the big tech. So there's currently an issue where we had a stakeholder meeting around the issue in Nigeria around Facebook and Instagram access. So there has been this, the Data Protection Commission had sued Meta for the misuse of data of Nigerians on WhatsApp, Facebook, and Instagram. And there was this threat of Meta leaving or Nigeria. And I'm wondering, because this when these decisions are made, it affects local businesses that use these platforms for their economic development and all that. How would big techs ensure and work together with both governments and these commissions to ensure that this doesn't affect the vulnerable communities that are using this for their economic growth and development?
Yeah, that's a very tough question, actually, and I think that's one of the challenges that we have, of how to create innovation and how to allow innovation, and with at the same time protecting human rights more generally, and data protection rights in more specifically, especially when we're talking about AI. I think that and I can talk about Meta, we have a very large team of lawyers and privacy experts that are working directly, not only in Africa, but in the global south in general, to make sure that we are in compliance with those regulations, especially when we are working very closely with the authorities, in the data protection authorities, to make sure that whatever we are doing is in compliance with those practices. Of course, we do have our business models, and so there is a lot of debate, for example, on how we can make those business models work with, for example, training AI. As I mentioned really briefly when I was doing my presentation, there was a very huge debate in Brazil about using the users' data in our Meta platforms to train the AI systems. And so the first step of the authority was to deny that. And so Meta had a very close relationship built with the authority to show that actually we had in place some policies, risk analysis, DPIAs, and a lot of documentation to make sure that the data would be protected, even though we are using that to train AI. So, of course, there is a debate of the legal base that might be used, or if we might be allowed to use the potential legal base that are selected. But of course, this is up to the authority to define. And I think the most important thing is that the tech companies, and I can say at least for Meta, are open to have that debate happen with the data protection authorities before doing those trainings and the usage of this data. And I think that just for having those openness to have this debate and have those discussions is the most important step to show respect for the global south users and data protection regulations that have in there. So and exactly for to honor those respects and the idea of honor those regulations is exactly to ensure that the business continuity and of course protecting innovation in those countries. So it's that trade-off of, it's not that we are going there and if you don't attend our demands, we are leaving. It's not that. It's having those debates, those dialogue, understanding the regulation, working with the authorities to create a middle ground that works for both sides in order to, of course, use the data, but also providing the innovation that those countries need. I hope I answer your question.
Yeah, you did answer the question. The other question I wanted to ask in terms of deployment of AI, especially for moderation and personalization in countries where large data sets might also reinforce system bias or ethical tensions. How does Meta balance this?
That's also a very tough question. Not let me slack today. So I think that it is an ongoing process. Bias is a challenge that we have, not only Meta, tech companies and all companies that are deploying AI systems have to deal with. There is also the ethical debate of how to deal with bias in more general sense, like is the AI system neutral? I was reading, not to sidetrack too much, but I was reading the other day an article saying that even because, let me take a step back. So most of the bias that we have nowadays is in the data set. So the data set's not enough representative of a global majority, for example, like people, and that's a problem with the data set directly. And not necessarily that is under the data the group is underrepresented. That's not true, but it's underrepresented in the data set that is being used to train the AI. This is more simple in the sense it's just a matter of the company having this understanding, that visibility, and providing a data set that better reflects the reality. There's another side that is more difficult to deal with, where bias is generated not because the data set is underrepresented, but because that group is underrepresented, period. And so no matter the data set that you created, that group might be underrepresented. And so that will generate bias automatically when you train. So that's also a challenge on how to deal with that. There's also the discussion of should we take this data out because it's sensitive data and show to avoid discrimination. But there's also articles showing that actually if we include this data to train the AI, it goes better to decrease discrimination, because having the representation is better than not having representation, because as we know, the AI reflects what the data that's being trained. If I take out color, for example, or a gender of the data set, it will not learn the difference of gender or the difference in color. And so it might, even in the end, discriminate against those different genders and those different colors because of that. So there is already some technical articles showing that having this data is better to train the AI with those differentiations. And of course, you need to test the way we are training so that the output is less discriminatory. But there are some papers that I was reading a few weeks ago that was very interesting. They showed that even without the data, those AI systems might not be neutral. For example, a lot of systems in the AI, this paper was doing analysis on, even if without the data set that was being trained, they were discriminatory in this, they had a bias on the left. So whatever the data that you use it, of course, depending on the data, they might have bias in different directions. But even without the data, they had a tendency to go left, which is very interesting considering the actual politics scenario in the US right now. So that's to show that bias might happen even when we take into consideration the data sets that are being used and how we build the systems. And that, in my opinion, is because the systems reflect humanity as it is. And so it's more like a question of how we deal with that. It's more like how we deal with the bias that exists in our society, and then how that reflects in the AI systems. That to say, I don't have a specific question, an answer to your question, but I think there are the ways that we are trying to do that at Meta is that we have a very strict risk assessment that's also based in the AI Act, so the foundational right risk assessment. And in this risk assessment, we take into consideration a lot of questions about how the technical teams is considering reducing AI, and we work with them to make sure that the output is as much as possible reflecting this effort to reduce bias. And so I would like to send that question back to you. Being a researcher, what in your experience, what's the best way, not only for tech companies, but companies in general that are dealing with AI to deal with bias?
I think first of all, there has to be a lot of, when you're building AI, you have to do red teaming of the product you're building to test and ensure that there are no biases. So making sure that we know that there are limited data, especially in the global south, making sure that you're testing that product with putting every thing that needs to be put to ensure that the product there is no bias, right? So a lot of research has to be done with different contexts, and a lot of testing has to be done with different people to ensure that there is no bias. For instance, when you look at some of the products that are built, AI products, especially for startups, there is an organization I consult for. The products, we do red teaming for those products and put in prompts and do testing to ensure that those products there are no biases in it, and there are no trust and safety issues around the risk, and also developing risk assessments for each of those products. And so that's how we do it for not big techs, but startups that are building AI.
Very interesting. Another question that I have, if I may, is that I think one of the challenges that we have in tech companies in general is because and say that because tech companies normally, by the standards of the AI Act, are providers, but a lot of companies that use AI are actually deployers. So they bring the usage of AI systems that they didn't build. And so, how, in your opinion, those medium, small size companies that are not, that haven't had the chance to say anything in the building of the AI systems, but need to deploy those AI systems, how can they make sure that the AI system is fair and is the user at least is without bias?
Yeah, of course, they have to do a lot of research of the AI system they are deploying, and also make sure that they do, as I said, red teaming and testing of the system. Especially because they didn't build it. Most of the time, as you said, these products are deployed. They are either for Meta, or they are using large language models from Google, and they are just putting together and deploying it. Also, ensuring that they understand the system themselves. Um, um, and what processes have gone in terms of the ethical frameworks that has been put in place for that system. So they have to do a lot of testing with several users. User testing is important to ensure before deploying it that it's fair, it's transparent, there are no biases in it. So testing is important. Research is important when it comes to deployments, and having the right policies in place. Also, most of the time, when small businesses build AI, they don't put in policies to guide the use of the AI, to even policies when they are deploying it. What is the process that has been done or has been implemented before deployment? So ensuring that these policies are in place, and trust is important. When you talk about trust and safety, you have to have trust and safety frameworks that are guiding what you're deploying. Because you should be building with the people, building with the users, understanding who are the users, who is going to be using this, what is the what are they using it for exactly, so you can know the risk to avoid.
Yeah, I would also add to that. I was having a discussion in a workshop a few weeks ago about that, and I think that one of the things that came in the debate was that it should have some level of government support for those small and medium companies to exactly uphold those their rights and their protections against AI systems that are being used, because they most of the time they don't have a choice of they have only have a choice to either use the AI system that is being provided, or don't use an AI system and get back in the run for innovation and the competition between those companies. So it should have some kind of government support to make sure that if they're being deployed, they have some kind of security that those systems being deployed are safe and secure, and have, of course, this training about to reduce bias as much as possible, because otherwise they would only rely on the contract between deployer and provider, and most of the times the power imbalance between those two entities is very big. So if with those government support, we can have a little bit of reducing of this policy, power imbalancing as well. So I think that's also a very good thing too that I wanted to add.
Thank you.
Thank you. What a great debate. Um, I was just mentioning to Irene that I wish more of our leaders and politicians would sit down and ask these types of questions to each other. Anyway, I think Irene has the first question. Irene Courtney is our community outreach coordinator. Please go ahead, Irene, and ask your question.
First of all, great to meet you both. Thank you so much for joining us. And I am so enjoying this panel today. The first question is for Carolina. So I was wondering, given that Meta has a past with basic access when they were providing internet in exchange for signing up for Facebook. How do you think, from a governance standpoint, what political frameworks or international norms would ensure that digital rights would be upheld and create a public trust? Because I know this program has been banned in several countries, so I would love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, no, of course. I would try to answer as to the best of my knowledge. So I think that the best way to it's more of it seems like your question is more like how can we make sure that the regulations obligations are upholded by the companies, and of course the main way is for of course there are the fines. That's a very good way normally to make the business think about twice about how to comply with regulations and how important the regulation is, and to make sure that we are in compliance with that. That has been worked with Meta in the past and continues to work. Not only Meta, but with other companies. But I think the best way normally to make it the importance of the regulations known to the business and make sure that they want to be in compliance, not only by fear, but only by showing the opportunity that being in compliance does bring. So we mentioned about trust. I think Joy mentioned about trust and on the company and the brand, and so being in compliance with those regulations shows and provides trust with that brand, with that company. And I think that the effort that Meta has been doing in the last few years with interacting with the data protection authorities is exactly to show that we understand that we want to be in compliance with those regulations, and we are bringing an effort to be in compliance with those regulations. And so that's why, for example, Meta does not use our users' data to train AI currently. Actually, from yesterday it does. But why? Because 3 years ago, we started building that partnership and that trust with the data protection authorities, and building that case of how we would like to use our users' data to train AI. And so that's why there's a lot of debate on should we use the legitimate interest as a legal base, should we not use, how do you opt out, etc. But the fact that the authorities are currently deciding pro Meta using that data is exactly because of that partnership and trust that has been built over the years and supporting our use case and why we are doing that the way we are doing that. So I think the most important thing is showing that this trust and partnership is something that you can build over time if you have, of course, if you are proactive in acting in that sense.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to hear that Meta is learning from past mistakes, and I look forward to seeing this in practice. And then my next question is to Joy. Joy, again, hi, very nice to meet you. You talked a lot about inclusion and bringing everybody together. So I was wondering, how does this look in practice, given that there are different economic incentives? When we bring different stakeholders, the public obviously could use an extra income, selling their data, but the regulatory, authorities have different perspectives, the tech companies. How do you think we could reconciliate these different economic incentives? Thank you.
So for bringing people together, if I understand your question, how do we reconcile the economic incentives that are given to the public by the big tech and the regulation that the data protection organizations are putting in place, right?
Exactly. And the public, obviously, because, those who sell their data have obviously also an economic incentive.
I don't think economic incentives should consent and data protection should be an implication of economic incentives. So I don't think people should be able to sell their data because of their economic situations, all right? Because most times this data is going to be used for different things, and we do not know what it could be used for in the future, right? Especially data that cannot be erased. And the data protection commissions are right to say that this sensitive data has to be deleted, and economic incentives shouldn't be in exchange for people's data. I think the big tech should find different other ways to incentivize people when they want to collect data, and it shouldn't be data that things that are markers that could be used for future, put people at risk, especially in the low and medium income countries in the future. I think when it comes to data and privacy, there shouldn't be any economic incentive for collecting people's data. Because if you're talking about consent and you really want to get people's consent, and you really want them to understand what their data is being used for, you shouldn't put any incentives to maybe get their data. There should be other things that could be given to them as incentives for collecting data, but minimal data, not sensitive information. And of course, there are laws and policies in place on how this has to be done. So the big techs or the organization has to go to the Data Protection Commission to understand what are the consents, what are the laws or the regulations around this. Yeah.
Thank you so much. You actually gave me so much to think about now, and I could just have so many other questions. But I have a third question that is for both of you. So basically, since we started talking about WorldCoin, right? This is the reason why we started thinking so much about data exploitation. So can you both answer what safeguards or principles should guide future tech deployments in economic vulnerable regions? Since, following up with this discussion about economic incentives, so how can we set up safeguards so innovation aligns with dignity, agency, and public trust? And thank you again.
No worries. I can go first if you are okay, Joy. I think that the most important thing is to keep in mind the human-centric approach. And so understand why we are creating anything on the AI systems. It's that's important for Meta, but also for our tech companies and all companies that create AI. Why we are creating AI? What's the purpose of creating AI? What's that system specifically going to serve? And in the end, of course, the idea is to serve humanity, but what exactly is that we are serving humanity with and for? What's the impact that we want to generate? What's the necessity that we are attending with the AI, that is specifically AI system? So having those discussions at the beginning of building and thinking about AI models, the center of ethics is very important, but also having that the potential of collaboration with humans and of course groups that represent the humanity in general, but also those, especially those minorities, or if not minorities, the global south, for example. It's so important that to bring that visibility into the perspective when we are thinking about training and building AI systems. So that collaboration is so very important. And I just wanted to bring that at Meta, we have a project called Open Loop that exactly to collaborate with authorities and groups while doing workshops of scenarios that later will be used to bring those perspectives into building AI systems or even process more generally. So I can also share the channel. We have a channel externally, and that's a very interesting partnership. Thank you, Erini. I really love that partnership. I think that's a very important part of what we do at Meta, and so having that at the center of what we are building, consider building, is so very important.
Okay, just to add to what Caroline has said, I think co-creation and community consent is important. There should be participatory methods to define what is benefits and what is harm, and what does it mean in the local context, right? And also, I think we should set local benefits benchmarks to ensure that there is a measurable share of value when it comes to what is being created or what is being tested or what is being deployed. I also think that there should also be public interest business models, having open source platforms, cooperatives having some open source part of what they are creating, so that the communities can also leverage and use it and to build things. So involving the community, the local community first from the start is really important. They shouldn't just be, as I said, technology should not be built, should be built with us and not to us. And so they should be involved in both the decision making, in both the designing, in both the implementation of the tech that is being built. So that's what I wanted to add.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we have just a few minutes left. I'm not sure if Rohana has a question. Do you, Rohana? If not,
I actually don't, because I think all the questions
yeah,
have been answered at this point. So I've ran out of
there's
questions.
there is there's a question that I would like to ask to our panelists, and that question is, what does informed consent look like, in contexts where you have, digital literacy, economic precarity, and asymmetrical power dynamics in play?
Want to go first, Joy, or
You can go first.
Okay. So I think that's a very important question, Priya. Thanks for asking that. So there's a lot of debate on how can we do informed consent, because it is a very important part of the legal base that the users and the individual persons have to have that clarity on what I'm going to do with that data. And so, and I think that's exactly to that point that's why most tech companies are not using that legal base when we are talking about building AI systems. Exactly because first, it's very difficult to go when we are talking about a large volume of data that is needed to train AI systems. I would get person to person on that to get that consent. And second is that it's very difficult to explain how I'm going to use that data to train AI systems, especially because there is still, we might know how the data is going to be used as an input, but it's very difficult to explain what's happening inside the AI. I know the input, I know the output, but explaining what's happening inside the AI is still very difficult, even for technical people that are working directly in the AI systems, in those agents. And so having that to explain that, providing that level of clarity to individuals can be very hard. So that's why I think most tech companies are opting to not use consent. But in case that we are using consent, I think it's very important. The most important thing is to try to summarize how AI works in very, very layman terms, because sometimes we get lost in the technicalities, and it's very technical. Can be very hard to explain AI, even for us that are working in AI in a daily basis. So I think it's important to try to put that in layman's terms and make sure to focus on what's the input, what we can control and explain. So what's the input, what's the output, how is your data connected to that large volume of data? Because most of the times we end up thinking that it's going to be, oh, my data is going to be used to train the AI, but your data is one in a huge data set of thousands and thousands of data that are normally going to be anonymized or at least de-identified to train that data. So having that level of explainability is very important. Is even if nothing to bring the comfort that no, your data is not going to be directly to be used to train the AI, and the output is not going to affect directly you, because the output doesn't affect the people that their data is being used to train. The training data is the past. Output is always to talk about the future. So unless you're going to be the user of the AI, that AI is not going to, the output is not going to affect you. So that's also very important.
Okay, just to add to what she said, I think informed consent must be reimagined as a trust-building, community-centered process, not just a legal checklist. So consent has to be given in languages people speak, formats that they understand. That's the only way it could be informed, because when you when you say you have people's consent and they don't really understand what is being built, what the data is being used for, it's not explained to them, then it's not informed. So it has to be a process of building trust with the community. It has to be community centered. It has to be an accessible communication. It has to be for choice. It has to be by choice, genuine choice, not incentivized. Like, people shouldn't be incentivized to be used for their data to be used. So people must be free to say no without losing access to essential services. They must be free to say no without using access to even the products that the data is being collected for. So education is important. Context is important when it comes to consent. Context, the language that is being used to inform the people, they have to have a choice to say no when it comes to the use of their data. Thank you.
Wow, this was the hour is almost over, and I have to say this was an incredibly enlightening discussion. Thank you so much to our amazing guests for sharing their expertise, their experiences, and unfortunately, due to time constraints, we weren't able to explore every aspect of this topic. However, the depth and quality of today's discussion was absolutely remarkable. Thank you again to our panelists and to everybody else who joined us today. Remember, you can stay connected with Zero Day Dispatch through our website, newsletter, our LinkedIn page, Slack, and other social media platforms, all of which have been added to the chat. We really, really look forward to continuing these crucial conversations. Until next time, thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
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 Thanks.